What did you study when you were here at the
I
colleges?
was an English and philosophy split major. Yeah,
And so you graduated, I believe, in 1955.
that's right.
How do you become a fine art dealer?
Okay. Uh, I went directly from college to law school, and I got a law degree. Uh, Before I passed the bar examination, I was drafted and did 2 years in the Army. When I came out, I got qualified by passing the bar exam in New York, which is where I lived at the time. And I had a couple of jobs with law offices, and then I went to work for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was not then yet the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it was the predecessor agency. Um, and when it became a department, there was a physical reorganization of the staff from the different elements of the predecessor agency being brought together. Um, and a man moved into the room next to the cubicle that I had, and I walked by, and there were pictures hanging on his wall, and I looked, and I said, well, that's interesting. And I went in, I knocked on the door, and went in, introduced myself. I said, what's all this? And as you may or may not know, if you show the least bit of interest to any art collector what they have, you're going to hear about it. And long story short, I got invited to dinner at his house, his wife and daughter, and saw the art collection that he had, and went home with a little etching by a German artist named Otto Dix, who was one of the early German expressionists of the between the wars period. I still have that etching. It's probably worth 100 times more than what I paid for it, literally. And that began my interest in buying art. I had previously, I saw art galleries, but it never occurred to me that an ordinary person could have art till I visited this guy's house. Um, and so I started to buy art a little bit, and then I was working as a lawyer for the Department of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, but I also got involved in a antiques business in New York with some other people, and we had a shop. And I became more interested in artwork. I was buying Art Nouveau posters and things like that, which were just it was a revival of that in the 1960s, and so and then in 1970 the department had a reorganization. I moved to Boston, and again got involved in another antiques business here, and which was not successful. But the one thing that was selling, I brought in a few shelves of books that I had in boxes at home, and people were buying the books, and they were art books. So I started to buy more art books and put them in there. And then I started to go to book shows, and I started to see the things that people were selling at book shows. I was going there as a buyer, and I said, oh, I could do this. So I became a book dealer. I joined the Massachusetts and Rhode Island Booksellers, Antiquarian Booksellers Association, and uh, started to do the shows. And I got into it fairly heavily, all the while still working. And you know why I'm saying all the while still working and doing something else is because uh, so many people don't get the idea that you could do one job to earn your living and do another job to deal with the things that you enjoy. And I keep trying to tell that to people. Um, and so that's my digression. I'll go back. But the uh, I became more involved in the book business. I became a member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, which is the premier professional association for book dealers. Um, and over time, I started to bring an occasional piece of artwork to the book shows, prints. I'm primarily interested in works on paper, fine prints, drawings, photographs. Um, and so I would bring a little rack of prints, and so the people were there, they were at the book show, but I would occasionally sell a picture. So I said, well, this is good. And so to bring it up to date, I started with the story I'm telling you started in the early 1960s. In 2000, I sold the condominium apartment that I had in Boston, and at a price way greater than what I had paid for it. And I had some money, and I started to buy art in a way more serious way, both qualitatively and quantitatively, than I had. And pretty soon I was really more dealing in art than dealing in books. And that's kind of where it is now. I moved to Cape Cod for a few years, and then I started to do some business with a gallery up in Portland, Maine. And I was up there one day, and we were talking about how great Portland is and so forth, so forth. And she said, well, you should move up here and open your own gallery. And I said, no, that is not something I want to do. But on my way home, I said, yeah, why not do that? It could be a folly of my old age, and get me off of Cape Cod, which was really not a milieu that I was happy in. It was not urban enough. My neighbors would say, you go over the bridge, we only do that feet first, you know? And so I did. I moved to Maine. I opened an art gallery, and I've had the art gallery. I am just in the process now of closing it. And I want to go back to sort of dealing privately. I sell through my website, and I sell at the shows that I exhibit at. And the world of art galleries today is, if you do enough events where wine and cheese is served, people will come. They won't come otherwise, and I just didn't find a market in Portland for what I do. So after 9 years of doing it, I'm ready to stop with the retail gallery space, but continue with a new space that I have that I'll do by appointment, maybe an occasional open studio kind of thing, and work through the website.
You know, I definitely, as with you, I want to come back to the idea of a job that funds your passion as well as a job that funds your life, you know, your needs. But one thing that I'm really struck by is there's sort of this evolution of, yes, you saw art that you admired on somebody's wall, and I love the way you put, you know, it never occurred to me that a regular person could buy art, because I think that's true of a lot of people. You know, it never occurred to me that a person could be in the theater. It never occurred to me that somebody had to be on the radio. I didn't even realize I was a radio professional until I'd been doing it for 2 years, because I was just like, well, this is fun, but wait, I'm making my living doing this. This is lovely. But there's also antiques and there's books. You clearly at some point developed an appreciation for things well made and things made to be beautiful and to last. Where do you think that comes from in your background?
Oh, I think it comes from my college education here. I went to school back in the time that they had the Western Civ courses, the coordinated program, so that you kind of were exposed to history and art and music and how they all interrelated to each other in the periods that they, in the various periods. And though my own family were not collectors by any means, they kind of, I got taken to the opera when I was, 11 or 12 years old. I got taken to art museums and things like that. So I had some knowledge and some interest in what I was seeing. So I think it's a combination of, my family upbringing and my education here.
Where are you from originally?
New York City.
New York City.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the fact that you now are in a position where you can close the retail space, the public space, and really focus on your website and such. That strikes me as a fascinating change. Has the ubiquity of moving information around and sharing imagery and such changed what
Immensely.
you do?
Yes, it when I first started with this as a book dealer, there was a weekly magazine that was published, and the way people sold books is they would take a half page or a full page or 2 pages, and they would list, 30 or 50 or 100 books for sale, and that magazine would go out and people would call you up and buy the books and you would send them to them. Um, when the internet came along, somebody got the idea that that book selling would be very suitable to the internet, and a website was developed that you could list your books on, and it would go out through the internet, searchable databases, and so we all switched to doing that, and it was so successful that people stopped going to bookstores, people stopped paying rent on bookstores and worked out of their houses, to the point that it created a complete change in the business. There are very few retail bookstores, used bookstores left, very few new bookstores left. It's a very contracting kind of a business. And there are now, half a dozen or so sites on which we can sell our books. Similar things has not happened, or has happened but hasn't been as successful with art databases. There are internet sites where you can list art for sale, and I've done some of it and I've sold some things on those sites, but my better response has been through my own website.
I'm what I wonder about then, both in books and in art, do you find yourself then encountering two separate communities? One that is savvy about using online resources to interact and to buy and to sell, and one that does not? And do works maybe perhaps fall through the cracks? In other words, can there be a collector, somebody who is dealing in works that doesn't embrace a website, that doesn't embrace online resources? And does it become harder perhaps to find things that, the individual can't afford to keep a store open, nor are they particularly internet savvy, but they're sitting on a lovely collection and it becomes a word of mouth thing? Does this create sort of a stratified world?
It's, yeah, I guess I think, well, I try to be in both of those worlds. I do the shows, which is, some people just work totally on the internet, and some people don't work on the internet at all. But I try to have a foot in both camps. I mean, I do get out there physically to show stuff, which I think is important. You meet people that way. But the curious thing is, if I were to start evaluating in terms of the amount of business that I get, it's coming to me from total strangers who I've never met, who become customers. And that's one of the amazing things that the internet has done. People trust it, which seems like counterintuitive. Uh, but I've bought a lot of stuff online, and I've sold a lot of stuff online with very few problems in either direction.
I don't want to get this discussion for me is fascinating, and I realize the one thing that we, especially since this is, turning into a 20-25 minute interview for a 5 minute story.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too far away from the actual works that are going to be at the Davis Gallery. What are you bringing?
Okay. Uh, the I thought about, well, what should I do? So I'm a dealer, as I said, in works on paper, and I thought that I would try to just do a random selection of things that covered the gamut of what I have. And I came up with the idea of Audubon to Warhol, 200 years of American art on paper. So we've divided it into sections, sort of topical and chronological sections, to where we have some things that go in, from the early 19th century with Audubon and a few. I wish I had brought the catalog in. A few other artists, and then into the 20th century with social realism and modernism and things like that. So I brought a selection of things from the various decade periods and various art movements. And then I've also got a separate section of what I call my personal collection. And it's all my personal collection. I mean, in a certain sense. The only thing that is really that I mean when I'm using personal collection in the context of this show. These are things that are mine, that are not for sale, as opposed to the other stuff, which is mine because I still have it. And the personal collection, a lot of it is things I've bought from artists who are friends of mine, who I know, or whose work I particularly admire. And it doesn't have any more focus than that. So does that answer the question?
It absolutely does,
Yeah.
because I think one of the things that's intriguing about that is you use the word random, but you have consciously covered, making sure that you're representing decades, yet at the same time, isn't curation to a certain degree also a reflection of a personal style and a personal taste?
Yes, it certainly is. And there's an immense amount of imbalance in this exhibition. Than there would be if I was really trying to do a scholarly exhibition of 200 years of American works on paper, which this is not. It's things that I particularly. Okay, well, here were some of the criteria. There need to be enough names that are familiar to people that it doesn't just look like some guys, gatherings. But there also needs to be some things that people may not have heard of, and that show how, what the scope of art of these periods is. There needs to be some stuff that I was willing to take off of sale for a year, and then some stuff that I wasn't, that could have been in the show but isn't. And so yeah, it's a personal curation, and it had factors involved that might not have been the case if it was if this was a museum collection and I were the curator putting on a show.
That is 20 minutes, which is far more than I need. So I'd
Okay.
kind of like to shift gears, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
and ask you about the Guerin Center. I mean, you were here this weekend to attend the opening.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this new facility on campus?
I'm very impressed. And I had been up here last summer. I was back for my 60th reunion. And we got a tour, and it was still fairly raw space, but you could see that it was going to be really nice. But I had no idea it was going to be this beautiful. And I went through the different performance spaces yesterday, and I just thought they did a really fabulous job, and I think it's certainly a much needed new facility on the campus. It brings together things that I understand are dispersed, have been dispersed all over the campus, uh, and I think it's going to be a really uh, terrific addition to the colleges and going to draw a different, kind of students. I was talking to one of the music professors yesterday. We were sitting next to each other at the dinner, and he said we used to have 5 majors in music, and now we have 40, and that uh, it used to be hard to impress students with the facilities available for performing arts, and now I think it's going to be very easy to do that, and so I think that it will help the colleges draw more students in those performing arts disciplines. And as somebody who's always been, a fan of the humanities, I think that's a good thing.
Will you do me a favor and also just give me your
Absolutely.
name so I have it on the recording?
Yes, my name is Edward Pollack, Ed Pollack, and is that it?
That's it.
Yeah, great.
Well, that was a very enjoyable interview. Thank